While we're waiting for Mike to settle down, we'll go ahead and start. I'm still getting some comments about last week's lesson, and we do appreciate that. They were good comments, by the way. And I've told you that I'm not sure that I can teach you anything. We have some good Bible readers here, some good scholars, and whenever Jared asked me if I would take part in this, I said sure, but then I got thinking, who am I following? And then it took me back to Freed-Hardeman College before it was a university, and I ran the print shop there for 3 years. And I was scheduled, I preached for the White Street Church of Christ there for 8 times during that time. And I was in the bathroom before services. The auditorium was full. I think we had 800 people there that night. And my boss was there, Jess Wilcoxon. And he said, "How are you doing, Carlos?" And I said, "I'm really nervous, Jess." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Have you seen who's in that audience up there? I'm supposed to preach up there in just a little bit." And we had noted men from all over the brotherhood and a lot of college professors and all this. And he said, "Carlos, listen, they don't know they know more than you do, but they don't know anything about what you're going to say. And so you know more about what you're going to say than any of them do." And so I got a little courage about that, and I got up there and I preached in front of some mighty good preachers and college professors and all of this. And got a few laughs out of them, and so we're okay. Tonight I want to talk about the greatest testimony never given. The greatest testimony never given. You know, the testimony is the word of an eyewitness. If somebody got if they were able to get up in the witness box in trial, and it said, "Did you see that man point the gun and pull the trigger?" And he says, "No, but I tell you what, my friend said that he did." Well, that's not any good. That's hearsay. That's not the word of an eyewitness. Well, there's things that I have witnessed that I cannot explain. I mean, there's no need to argue with me about it. I know that I have seen a whole bunch of UFOs. I'm eyewitness to that fact. I saw one up close. I mean, it was a big metallic-looking thing. It was kind of triangular shaped, and I wasn't the only one that saw it. And before we could get our cameras all limbered up, you know, that thing disappeared like they always do. My brother said that he saw him drag racing. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, well, it was him. He said it. You know, he said that he was laid out in the yard in a lounge chair, and there was 3 of them up there, and 2 of them would line up, and they would streak across the sky, and then they'd line up, and they'd come back. And he said, "I watched them drag racing." So maybe they were. I don't know what they were about. I'd also, you know, John said that if all the things that Jesus had done could be written, he said, "I suppose that all the books that should be written, the world could not contain it." Now that's a hyperbole. And so if you wrote all of the things that Carlos Tartar doesn't know, that I suppose that the world could not contain the things that should be written. But there are some things that I do know, and I have seen, and probably none of you have seen it. Maybe you have. But I was at a family reunion, and there was this guy that was a friend of my sister's and her family. He came along, and we were enjoying visiting. We were standing by a tree, and there was a watermelon lying there. And he said, "Let me show you something." And he went and got a broom straw, and he laid it lengthwise on that watermelon and turned it loose. And it bounced a little bit and then just turned 90 degrees. And I said, "What did that?" He said, "I don't know." And so he said, you do it. And so I did it. It bounced a little bit and turned side. He said, now that's how you can tell that a watermelon is ripe. He said, if it turns 1/8 of it, don't buy it because it's not ripe, or it has a too thick a rind. He says if it turns too fast, then the thing is too ripe, and don't get it. But if you lay it on there and it just turns around. And so try that sometime. I don't know, I'm a witness to that. But now, getting to the Bible, in Acts, the 1st chapter, they were going to elect somebody to take Judas's place who had committed suicide. And so he said, therefore it's necessary to choose one of the men who have been with us the whole time the Lord Jesus was living among us, beginning from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up from us. For one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection. Somebody had to be with the apostles that they could say, I saw Jesus, that he rose, and I saw him ascend into heaven. Now, I preached in a meeting one time at a place called Chicken Bristle, and the building was full, had a whole bunch of preachers up here, and I said, do you guys want to preach? And they said, no, we came to hear you. I said, will you all leave so I can preach? But of course I was joking with them. But I announced that my sermon that night was going to be on if I had been there. And you talk about the pads and the pens coming out. And I said, I would love to hear what you all preach on this next Sunday. And so if I had been there, if I, and they were taking notes, and I knew that they were planning on preaching on that. But if I had been there, I think, I say, of course I'm just a human, I would have been, on Sunday morning when Jesus came out of that tomb, I would have been right there watching for him to come out. It's like, if I'd been back there, there would have been 9 people on that ark, If I'd have been back there, I would have eaten the fruit. But this man had to have been there when and to say that he knew that Jesus had arisen from the dead. So before we get into the testimony that never was given, let me ask this. Can we at least agree that our life is our testimony? Others see it. And so as we go through life, we should not give an uncertain sound. Like Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 14:8, you don't have to turn there, but it was just, in the Old Testament, they had the trumpets. And the Calvaries, they always had trumpets or a bugle, and they would blow it. And according to what sound it made, whether to charge or whether to retreat. In the military, I hated revelry because that meant it's time to get up. And then within 5 minutes, you had to have that bed made, and so they could bounce a quarter on it. And so I had a friend, Gene Helm, and he was a magnificent song leader at the church in San Antonio, Texas. And he had been in the military band, and he was stationed in Germany. And he said they were outside, and they were to blow revelry. But he said, something, it was so cold that all of our instruments were frozen. Those little finger things, whatever you call them, they were frozen. They wouldn't even work. And so the only instrument that they had that would work was a clarinet. And so they blew revelry on a clarinet. Well, a general heard that. Well, they had broken military protocol. And when he got through with them, they didn't do that anymore, you see. But see, we are not to, that clarinet was an uncertain sound. In our Christian walk, we should not give uncertain sounds. Make sure that people know that we're living a godly life. Not perfect. I don't know anybody that thinks that anybody is supposed to live a perfect life. James and I were talking about it. We were raised pretty much the same way as I described to you last Wednesday night. But how we live is telling others our view of the Christian life. And I'm sure that you could say the same thing as I. My testimony has not always been good. There was a time when I thought that I could, my testimony was that I could run with the world and run with Christ as well. I drove a school bus for Warren County Schools for 4 years, and during the time when I was a substitute driver, we would sit in this big room in the bus garage and wait for our assignment. Of course, we'd sit there and run our mouth, and I was saying something about a culture on another side of the world, and it had nothing to do with skin color, okay? I'm not a racist, but this man accused me of saying a racist thing. I mean, the first full-time work that I ever did was with a black church, and the first person I ever baptized was a black girl. So I'm not a racist. But what I had said, it pertained to article of clothing that they wore. And so this young man beside me, very educated, was learning to be Japanese or Chinese, maybe it was a Chinese interpreter. And he became very nervous. And he said, "Please don't ever use that term again." I said, "Okay, but why?" And see, he was expecting an argument out of me, and he said, "It's racist." Well, I got to thinking about it, and the next time I saw him, I went over to him and I said, I want to thank you for something. I want to thank you for telling me that what I said was racist, because I am a Christian, and I do not want to come off that way. Thank you so much. And so I could see that his opinion of me rose a little bit. Sometimes it's good for us to have enemies. I don't know if I've got any enemies or not. I know there's some people that don't like me too awful good. But sometimes our enemies, they will tell us what we need to hear about ourselves. And they don't care. They don't care. They don't hurt your feelings or anything. They just up and tell you, you're ugly, or you have a bad attitude or something, you see. So I don't want this to be a running commentary on my life, but there are times when my testimony wasn't good, and I hope it's a whole lot better now. But we could go through the Bible and pick out people's testimony that it wasn't good. For example, in Leviticus 24, and you don't have to turn to these, but Leviticus 24, there was a man who was half Israelite and half Egyptian. And evidently he was a smart aleck, and he was walking around through camp, and I don't know how the fight started, but he got in a fight with an Israelite. And they were slugging away at each other. And this man, during the course of this fight, cursed using God's name. Now, people use God's name. I realize there's more than using the name of God in vain, than just saying His name. But this man cursed, and he blasphemed the name. The name. It's talking about God. That's extremely important. And so what they did, those that heard him, they put him in under guard. They put him in whatever jail they had at that time. And they went to Moses, and he went before God to find out what they were to do with him. And he said, "You're to kill him." Those that heard him say that, they were to cast the first stones, and then the rest of the whole congregation is just pick up rocks and take this man out. Because what was his testimony? Well, you can just curse the name of God and be all right. That's what we hear on the street all the time. And and Christians, I hear Christians using the name of God in a way that they shouldn't. There was a man in Numbers, the 15th chapter, and his testimony was that the Sabbath law wasn't worth keeping, because on the Sabbath he was out picking up sticks. And so what was his testimony? They had to take him in and find out what God wanted to do with him, and he said, "Kill him. Stone him to death." Well, what if he had just been let go? Then his testimony to them was this, that you can profane the Sabbath day, and next thing you know, half of Israel would have been out there picking up sticks on the Sabbath day and breaking the Sabbath day protocol. And so you cannot ignore God's commands with no consequences. I know of a church now that is just breaking up into splinter groups. 150 here and 150 there. And their testimony is, and one was trying to pull my sister away with them. And I had to settle her down. She's 89 years old. And she didn't even get sleep. She's not getting sleep because her church is busting up. And so I talked to her about that. And so their testimony is that if you don't like it, just leave. You just don't like it, just leave. Like I told you about some of the churches in my home county. They couldn't get along with each other, and so they just went and built another church building and started worshiping there. And now you have two little groups here and there, and can't even get along together. I knew of a church that they were so divided that they were still meeting in the same building, yet one group met over there and another group met over here, and they wouldn't even talk to each other. I've known of two churches like that. It didn't happen while I was there, but one of them I actually did preach at that church. There was another, I can just go on and on, I know that. And so, but I have some good news, and that is that I don't have to preach until 7:30. When I'm done, I'm done. But I will give you a few examples like this just to impress on us that our testimony for godly living needs to be good. There was a preacher that I knew, and he owned a car lot and a furniture store. I actually went with him he was holding a meeting in another state, and I rode with him. And we would sit in his furniture store, and I was able to change his mind on a thing or two. And just teach him the way more perfectly, I thought. But then after I became an RN and I was working for home health, then I had a patient, an old fellow that he and I became real good friends. And he said, "I want to tell you something about that man, that preacher that owned the furniture store." He said, "My daughter was in there looking for furniture. And she said, he wouldn't keep his hands off me. And I just told him, listen, you're supposed to be a Christian. You are a preacher, and you're supposed to be telling the rest of us how we should live our lives." He said, "Yeah, but sometimes we lay that aside." lay that aside. And so that's the attitude that some have. You know, I knew a girl, a lady, that she saw that it was a very bitter winter. And she saw that her neighbor down the road, it was a lady that hardly had any income, but her lights were not on. She said, I haven't seen her lights on for a while. I'm going to go down there and check on her. Well, she found the lady in there. She didn't have any money. Her electric had been turned off. She had no heat. She didn't have food. And so what did she do? She went and got her electric turned back on, and then paid her bill for several months until she and brought her food until she could get on her feet. And now she is out in I think Idaho or somewhere, and living close to one of her children, and she's doing much better. But she may have just stayed there and died. But this lady didn't go around bragging about helping this woman. You know, I knew a man that I preached for a church that had grown quite a bit, and we made up money one time for this man was in a nursing home. His wife was taking care of her elderly mother. She needed some help. And so the elder said, let's make up a special contribution for her. And so we did. And then here at the end of the service, this man felt called upon to get up and tell us that he put $15 in that. Doesn't that violate Matthew, the 6th chapter? Don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. When you give alms in the King James Version, or when you do good works to help other people, works of righteousness, then he says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand does. You know, somebody said this, and I want to be very kind about it. But it said, you'll help anybody that you can. Pray with anybody that you can. Do whatever you can to help other people. But when you put it on Facebook, it takes on a new meaning. And I understand what they are talking about. You know, I had a man to give me $500 one time, and nobody ever knew about it except his son, and I told him. But I had two cars. I had my first house. I had an old VW that I was driving to work. I was preaching and driving to another. I also had another job. And I came out, and then I had an old 55 Ford that a woman had given me. And so I came out, and under my Volkswagen was a big puddle of oil. That motor was shot. I had no money. How am I going to get this car fixed? So we drove the old Ford, and this is, you know, it was getting pretty old. And this man told me, this 95-year-old man, he said, Carlos, I want you to come over to my house in the morning, Monday morning, and I've got something for you. And so I went over there, and he was always giving me milk and eggs and butter and things like this. And so I was expecting that. But he pushed his checkbook across there, and he said, write yourself out a $500 check. I said, I can't do that. He said, do it. You're going to. I said, I was friends with his son, Paul. I said, well, what about Paul? What's he going to say? He said, he won't say anything. He said, he knows that I've got plenty of money for everybody when I'm gone. And so I took the check, and I took it to Paul, and I said, here's what your daddy did. And he said, well, take it. He said, he's got enough money for us whenever he's gone. And I took it. I said, well, that's what I had to fix my car with. You see, the Lord was taking care of me, but that's the only people that knew about it. So my question is this: what is our testimony? We had a really good crowd here tonight. I guess everybody heard that I was going to be speaking, but Some people are telling us by their lives that the assembly is not important. Some people say that showing love to those that we don't agree with their lifestyle or whatever is not important. That it's okay to not love what we consider to be unlovable. So just my encouragement to us to just make sure, and I'm working on myself, and so you work on yourself, and let's just show a good example to people. People know if we're godly or not. I had a man in the Army one time tell me, I was in the Army hospital, and I was taking care of him, and a wounded veteran, and he said, "Tarter, there's something different about you." He said, "You're patient with me. The treatment that you're giving me, it takes a long time. And so, what is it?" I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a Christian. "I bet you that's it," he said. Here I am violating Matthew 6, maybe. I don't mean to, but maybe. But anyway, just a good life in front of people. Now to the testimony, the best testimony that a person did not ever give. And that was Judas. Now, I'm not going to get into the predestination thing. I'll let Joel do that whenever he wants to. But could he have repented? You know, people want to argue about Judas. Did Judas have to do what he did and all that? But I want to approach it from something else. What if Judas had repented, like Peter? And what if, let's just place him in our mind before a multitude of people, as Peter and the other apostles were on the day of Pentecost. And I can just hear him say, "Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. I betrayed the Messiah, the Son of the living God, the true King of Israel. I sold him for the price of a common slave." And I want to tell you what I've seen him do. I've seen him heal the sick. I've seen him cast out demons. I've seen him restore sight to the blind. I saw him raise the dead. I saw him raise a man up that had been paralyzed for 38 years. I saw him forgive sins. I saw him show up the hypocrisy of religious leaders that put foolish men to silence. I saw him walk on water, literally walk on water. And I saw him still a storm with 3 words: peace, be still. I saw him kill a tree because it had no fruit on it, giving us a very important spiritual lesson. And I sat as he washed my feet in humility and service. Did you know that I'm telling you, he even sent me on a commission, and I had miraculous powers freely given to me. And I had the power to heal the sick, to cast out demons. I even had the power to raise the dead. Now, I come to you knowing Jesus only and him crucified, testifying to you that he arose and ascended to the Father. And I'm asking you to believe this and not die in your sins. If he had done that, we might possibly tonight have been studying from the book of Judas. Some think that almost try to make a hero out of Judas. They think that he just misunderstood the Messiahship. He misunderstood the kingdom. and he was trying to force the hand of Jesus so that he would show his powers and take Rome out. Had he not heard of Elijah calling down fire from heaven? Did he not remember the sons of thunder? But Luke takes all that away from us, because in Luke 22:3 it just simply says, Satan entered into Judas. So let's just make sure that Satan doesn't enter into us. So I'm going to let y'all go. Unless maybe somebody has a word or comment or question or argument. Thank you so much.